Sessions. Welcome to the SSA Leadership Track. My name is August Brunsman. I'm the Executive Director. The way we're going to run this section, which is on welcoming women, minorities, and LGBT folks, diversity in general, into the humanist movement, is that we have 3 speakers, and they're each going to take 10 or 12 minutes up at the podium, and then they're going to take Q&A all as a group. So it is first going to be, and I'll introduce you each one by one. I think that'll be clearer. First, I'm going to introduce Jen McCreight, who is the author at Blaghag, which is a really nifty blog with all sorts of nifty things on it. So nifty that she has something like 5,000 Twitter followers. So this is pretty exciting. There's this thing that somebody wants you to do to that. I didn't understand it. Talk to JT, or don't talk to JT. Jen is also my boss, I should explain, because she is sitting on the SSA board of directors. So I'm probably going to get fired because I just recommended talking to JT. So don't do that and keep me here, please. Jen, while an undergrad at Purdue, formed the Purdue Society of Non-Theists. Right, look at me. That is an exciting, flourishing group that is doing all sorts of amazing things. She has graduated at Purdue and is now at the University of Washington and is studying genomic sciences, which I found out has nothing to do with gnomes. That's very sad. Anyhow, Jen has taken on a lot of issues regarding the involvement of women and femininity in the atheist movement, and please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. Is this working? All right.
It just records, it doesn't amplify.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. All right.
That one amplifies if you want.
Gotcha. Okay. So, intro. Why is diversity important? It's not just for the sake of diversity, but this is sort of the image our movement has right now. The big 3 names are all happen to be older white men who are also apparently very scary and coming out of the darkness. I don't know how we can fix that image. But a lot of people sometimes see diversity as just a quota thing, like it's just for image, but that's totally not true. I'm going to be talking about mainly things we can do to get women involved, but we'll touch other issues when other speakers come up here. But on the topic of women have just as much to contribute if we let them. These are all awesome female writers and bloggers and people doing all sorts of activism in our movement. And a lot of them people don't know about as much. They're just not getting as much attention in the movement for whatever reason, even though they're doing really great things. And if you want to check it out, on my blog on the main page at blaghag.com, I have a list of awesome female atheists where it lists a bunch of different bloggers who are doing great things. And check it out, please. But one of the great things is that we have all these women doing these great things. So why don't more people know who these people are? Like, if you look at the first image, people know who Dawkins is. Well, why are these people not as recognized? And I think it comes down to sort of a vicious cycle. And I want the purpose of this talk today to be to learn how to break that cycle. So sort of the cycle that happens is that, okay, you have few visible women to begin with for whatever reason. That leads to less women feeling welcome. They might look at a conference speakers list and be like, wow, these are all guys talking. Is there something wrong with this group? Like, why are there no women involved? There may be nothing wrong, but you can start thinking that way and not feeling welcome. And because of that, you have less women doing stuff. They're less involved with groups. They're not encouraged to start their own blog. And because of that, you have less women who are deserving visibility just because no one's doing that sort of stuff. And that just leads to this vicious cycle where less and less women are getting involved. So it's really important that we catch it now while we still have women doing great things before it gets too late and diversity is a big problem. So I'm going to give some specific tips on what we can do to make sure women feel comfortable in our movement. So 1, encourage women to take leadership positions. So this is the 2010 National Conference on Christian Apologetics. We don't want to be like them, where there's one woman in the corner. And this list actually went down another page with all men. So this is only half the speakers. We don't want to look like this. We want to encourage women to get involved, not just by inviting them to speak to conferences, but also to have them volunteer in local groups or national organizations. Just encourage them that they can take these leadership roles. we also need to provide a safe landing place. Now, a lot of clubs are already doing this just by having atheist groups in the community. It's a great thing for people leaving religion. But it's especially important for women because a lot of times the only community women have is their religious community, and that they may not be working as well. Like they're just tied to the church as their social network. So when they leave, it's really important to have that social aspect as well. And on that note, consider women's interests. Don't make everything pink. I love the prettiest show on earth. No, it's not. We don't need to cater to women in like really stereotypical ways. But you know, the whole debate on whether it's biological or social is irrelevant for this talk, but there are women who have different interests than men. A lot of women are really interested in the social side of it, and I've talked to so many women where they're like, you know, the cerebral debates are great, but sometimes I just want to hang out and talk about my kids or talk about my pets and just, you know, be a normal human and not think about atheism constantly. They just want the community. Or a lot of things is that, you know, a lot of women issues do intersect with atheism. Like people have been talking about at this conference, just that a lot of religious people try to oppose, you know, birth control or abortion rights. And that's really important to women. So there are places where we can talk about these topics that are interesting to all groups. And on top of that, we have to remember to not forget the humanities. I think a lot of atheist groups are really science-focused or philosophy-focused. And that's not to say women aren't interested in science. I'm a scientist. But when you look at the sciences, they're also skewed towards men already. So we're drawing from a pool that's very male-biased. So just being interested in more social issues, political issues, things that women are more interested in would gain a lot more members. And we need to have designated moderators. This obviously benefits everyone in a group. I know. Yo, Chuck. Yeah, biologist. I love it. But everyone benefits from this, but especially women. Women have this problem where they're more frequently talked over and interrupted in group discussions. And this is a really common trend, not just in atheism, but in all groups. And I've personally experienced this so much. And my group at Purdue, even though my members really liked me, I was constantly interrupted as president, even though my male officers were never interrupted. It's just something that happens. And you need someone there to realize this is going on and try to control it. And we need to think about women's needs when picking venues. Now, I love stuff like Skeptics in the Pub, but if you're just having pub events, that women might not be able to come to that. For example, if you have small children and women might often be the ones stuck taking care of them, they can't bring a little kid into a bar with them, so they may not be able to come. I've talked to a lot of women in the Seattle group who say that's why they don't come to the meetup events, just because they can't bring their 5-year-old to a bar. And on top of that, stuff like conferences, it would be great if really large conferences have something like a daycare service, where I know biology conferences do that all the time. And I know American Atheists this year, they're having a Camp Quest activity during their conference, which is an excellent idea. People can drop their kids off and then go talk about atheism while they're playing. That's an awesome idea. But the other thing with pubs is that it can sort of set up a dating environment. And we need to learn not. I love little cats. We need to learn not to swarm the single women. Maybe this is more common in college groups, but in my group, I saw it so many times where a new girl would come, and then all of a sudden, all the guys would come at once, be like, oh, a girl, and finally, there's a new one. And all try to flirt with her at once, and she would never come back, because she was scared away, unless some of the other women in the group intervened and like pulled her away and said, hi, we're not all crazy. Now, that's not to say you can't flirt at an atheist group or something. I mean, you know, you want to date someone who has similar interests to you. I can totally understand that. You know, me too. But it sort of depends on the setting. Like, if we're having an intellectual discussion about the effects of religion and government, that's not the time to start hitting on someone. If, you know, we're having a social event, we're just eating pizza, hanging out, like, that's more appropriate. So I think we just need to make that clear when we have events and have those separate events so people have the place they can go and do that. But a big thing is just supporting women. It's good to have someone on our side. It lends validity to our arguments when it's not just us saying that something's wrong or that something bothers us. That, you know, it's not just this one crazy harpy with a vendetta. Like, there are a lot of people who agree. So even the men in the room, it's totally okay to speak up when you see maybe something sexist or something that makes a woman uncomfortable. And another thing is it gets old defending yourself constantly. A lot of people, they don't want to do that, so they just give up and stop coming to meetings. And the final thing is, if someone's saying something really obnoxious, he can ruin it for everyone else, even if it's just one person in a huge group. I was at a Seattle Atheist pub night, and one guy was making very, very rude advances towards me, and I told him to cut it out, and he said, well, it's not sexual harassment because we're not in a workplace. All the guys around me, completely silent, never said anything. And the only reason I kept coming back is because I'm really active in the Atheist Movement. I still care about it, and I'm like, well, I know they probably felt awkward, and some even emailed me afterwards saying, Jen, I'm really sorry, but no one wanted to speak up then. And if I was another woman who maybe didn't care as much about the Atheist Movement, I probably wouldn't come back to that situation. So it's really important to just speak out when you see this stuff happening. Oop, wrong way. But the big thing is just to listen to women and try not to get defensive if someone criticizes you. For those of you who can't read it, look, kitten, I don't give a damn what you think. If I say I'm a feminist, then by God I am one. No, don't react this way. And it can be hard because no one likes having the label of sexist or racist or anything like that attached to them. You think you're a good person and you don't want someone saying these negative things about you. And you might legitimately think, well, in the past I've been so good that it just can't be happening to me. Like, I can't be that bad person. And the thing to remember is that everyone screws up sometimes. I mean, I write about feminism all the time on my blog, and I still say sexist things, and people point it out to me, and even it's hard to not get defensive, like, but I'm a feminist, I know what I'm talking about, and then I'm like, oh wait, that was kind of bad, I shouldn't have said that. So, no one's perfect. But some ways not to respond, don't just outright deny it. Don't try to say things like, well, I once did this one thing that was really great. It's like I said, you can have the best track history ever, but you might still do some stuff wrong in the present time. And don't respond with snark, sarcasm, or mockery, because that just disregards the person's feelings. If you have a serious concern and you really do feel ostracized in a group, you're just going to feel more ostracized if someone makes fun of you because you're bringing up that concern. If someone's brave enough to actually criticize you, you should be thankful that they're doing that. And this one's harder, but avoid certain triggering words. So these words have been historically used to basically silence women. Used when there's no such evidence of being hysterical or overreacting or over-emotional or humorless. It all plays into stereotypes about women, and anyone who's been into feminist discussions before, these words are always the first ones that come up just to disregard any argument a woman has. And so if you use it, even if you're not trying to use it in that way, a lot of women will just shut down the discussion because they think that you don't really want to talk to them about anything. But what if they're wrong? I mean, women can be wrong too. What if you just don't agree with them? Well, you're allowed to disagree with them, but try to do it professionally. Try to be the calm one in the situation. If you unintentionally offend someone, apologize, especially if you're a group leader, because you're not just representing yourself, you're representing the whole organization. So it doesn't hurt to say you're sorry. And discuss, don't debate. Even if you don't agree, you don't have to do it in a hostile manner. You just try to listen to them more. And if people are too upset, it's totally okay to say, hey, let's discuss this later when things have cooled down. If both sides are screaming at each other, that's not going to get much accomplished. So it's great to just, take a deep breath, say, like, I really understand what you want, like, I really value what you say, but, let's continue this tomorrow when we both have a chance to just take a deep breath. And I think that's the best way to go about things, because especially when it's stuff like something that was called sexist, a lot of people can get really upset about that and not think rationally about it. So it's great to just take a deep breath. But again, the main thing is to listen to women, and that's plural. Not all women are exactly the same. I'm just one woman. I've talked to many women, but you have to see that I'm a woman who's already active in the Atheist Movement. So maybe there's something different about my personality or my background that makes me more inclined to already come. We want to reach the women who aren't coming. So it's okay, keep an open ear, keep talking to as many women as possible. And if someone says something you don't necessarily agree with right away, take a deep breath and try to think about it first before just shutting down the conversation. But make sure to keep an open ear and keep listening to women. Thanks.
Patrick sees his hand. I'll shake your hand too. Awesome job.
Look at my notes. I'm still attached.
Oh no! All right. Debbie, I don't know if you got the lecture before. This will just count down 10 minutes. It's not like it's not going to cut your head off or anything. I promise. But just so you know, that's cool.
Yeah.
Do you want more time?
I have an old-fashioned version of that.
Okay.
That I will put.
Okay. Can use both. All right. Yeah, you can. All right. It is my pleasure now to introduce Debbie Goddard, who is the Director of Campus Outreach at the Center for Inquiry and is also the Director of African Americans for Humanism. Cool. She is a dear friend of mine, and she has been involved in this movement since the late 90s, I think, or 2000?
2000.
Yes, 2000. Okay, great. And had the great pleasure of meeting her at one of CFI's leadership events, and we spent something like an hour waiting on a bus while we were visiting the spiritualist community with Joe Nickel in upstate New York, and really bonded then. And every single time since then, and including that time, I have just had an absolutely delightful time whenever I've spent time with Debbie. So please join me in welcoming Debbie Goddard.
Well, thank you for having me here. Wow, this is a little confusing. No wonder everyone was having trouble with it before. Thanks for having me here to talk about this. I broke it. Oh, no. I have installed many a lav mic in my day, and never one that has worked anything like this. Hello, everyone. Hello. So, what I wrote down that I was going to talk about, I've changed about 7 times now. And part of the way I've changed it is to try to make it closer to 10 minutes, because I have talked to many people about issues of diversity in our movement. I usually focus on age, race, and sex. Race comes up a lot. I was just tokenizing some of you. Race comes up a lot, as does the lack of women, and often in larger local group meetings, the lack of young people. I've often given a talk of about an hour. I've done a couple workshops, and once for the Secular Student Alliance had to do a 20-minute talk, and now they're making me do 10. So let's see how that goes. I've often backed up a lot of the claims I've made with charts and graphs and colorful infographics, because I know that our audiences like to see the information offhand. This time I've limited myself. I didn't even make a PowerPoint, although I was tempted to show you pictures of speaker lists at meetings to show you that there are reasons I think and other people think that our movement has problems attracting members of racial minorities. I did not do that this time. I jotted down some notes. I felt like I was in 9th grade again. But I actually wanted to try to also get some feedback from you, but also keep it within 8.5 minutes now. So why doesn't our message resonate with certain demographics? That was the question I asked myself. And what can we do about it? So what I'm going to be calling it is people of color. And I hope that's not a contentious term to anyone. I didn't know how else to say people who aren't white. So it's people of color. We don't tend to attract people of color to our movement. In most areas, people are concerned about African Americans and Latinos. Oftentimes the discussion becomes, why don't we have more black people in our movement, but less often about Latinos. I think that's just kind of cultural history in the United States. In some areas of the country, talking about the lack of Asians involved might be more important, for example, in the Pacific Northwest. So why doesn't our message resonate with certain demographics? Firstly, how do we know it doesn't resonate with certain demographics? How do we know? Because we don't see them in our meetings. We don't see them on our speakers lists. We don't see them represented in what we call a movement. And even online, when you can't tell someone's race and often can't tell their sex, when people ask, they're not represented there either. Why don't we see people of color involved in our movement? I wanted to hear a couple reasons from you. Why do you think we don't have people of color involved in our movement? Yeah?
one that I personally run into is the religious background of the Hispanic culture is very, very Catholic.
So they're more religious.
Huge ostracization. If for one is an atheist, they lose huge families. And one in particular told me, her father, who's also an atheist, told
3 seconds more.
Worship whatever God they put in front of you so that you stay out of trouble.
So they're more religious, and there are cultural pressures that exist, maybe particularly in communities of more recent immigrant populations, you'd say, like Hispanics in some areas, where there are even stronger pressures to adhere to religious background. What else? You had? Yes.
Trenton, New Jersey, they don't teach evolution in the high schools. And so that is that's a missed early opportunity to question Genesis. Reason I was told is these are religious people and we don't want to get into the controversy.
So in cities with large black populations, there are the education system's failing them at bringing in different ideas because they're seen as a religious population. All right, 2 more. Liz?
Black people come and don't see anybody like them.
That's good. Jesse?
We're choosing venues and topics that are of interest to people currently in the movement.
Have you seen this talk before? I'm glad. Yeah, and John, since they went so quickly.
Oh, no. They got
No. Did you have one? No? Okay. Yeah, I wrote down these populations are generally more religious. That's true in every survey done ever. We lack diversity. That reinforces the lack of diversity. Greta, I think, is going to talk more about that. There are none in this area. That's actually a valid reason. If I were organizing in Buffalo, I wouldn't be concerned about the lack of Asians in my group. There aren't many to speak of. However, I work with the Center for Inquiry. At the CFI DC branch, if we have 60 people show up reliably for a meeting, and maybe one of them is African American, that is a problem. Because the city is something like 66% African American. And they're meeting in the city, and some of the pressures that might exist regarding transportation and whatnot actually don't. There are other reasons why they're not showing up for meetings. Or one that I hadn't heard said, but I have heard before working in this movement that I think is kind of particular to this movement is that it is racist or against our humanist principles to be concerned with the lack of racial diversity in our movement. Has anyone else here heard this, or do you not have this? Yeah. Who says it? White people. So you know, who says that it's also sexist to be concerned about the lack of women in our movement? Men. Yeah, very true. And we don't live in the kind of world where we can ignore the fact that race exists. I was talking to Andrew from the British Humanist Association. I don't see him here now, but I asked him some question about whether Penelope Cruz would be considered white. It was a longer discussion, long story, but he said, I don't really think about race. I mean, it doesn't really exist, does it? And I said, I don't really think about the difference between British and American people. It doesn't really exist, does it? I mean, you're just like us. Oh my gosh. And so I've actually said that to Canadians honestly. Like, I don't really think of you as that different. It's kind of like if I go to California and they're sort of different than me because I'm from Philadelphia or something, and they're like, no, Canada is a different country. And yeah, I know, but you're just kind of like us, right? No, there are differences that are really important to Canadians. Cultural differences, cultural knowledge, experience, that when I moved to Buffalo, since it's right next to Canada, I had no idea about, and I was convinced I sort of knew because they look like me and they talk kind of like other people in Buffalo and not me. And their TV stations look similar, and no, I've been learning a lot about how different Canadians are, how differently their historical structure makes the culture. So the point there is race is real culturally, if not biologically, in that those things can be argued. They are important distinctions, and many times people in minority groups or underprivileged groups recognize this. So, actual reasons. I have some defenses of those things, but I actually covered most of them. Who do we tend to attract to our meetings? And this was mentioned. We tend to attract, especially to local group meetings, people who are financially comfortable, people who have spare time. They don't have young children at home that they have to worry about taking care of. Right there already, we're going to be looking at older people who have some level of higher education, no young kids at home. We don't provide childcare at our meetings. We don't usually see 20 and 30-year-olds come in who are busy struggling with new jobs and new families. We attract people who are interested in science and philosophy, and you could see statistics about who it is that's getting upper-level degrees in science and philosophy. They don't tend to be people of color. We attract people with interest in egg-headed topics and debates, which is still most of what our meetings are. Presentations on evolution and creation or the history of the Bible and things like that. When groups start doing different kinds of meetings, we find that we attract different kinds of people. The story of humanism isn't that appealing to some people. The story I've heard over years of being involved in this is this. The Greeks invented science and philosophy, and of course their wonderful, wonderful system of living, and for some actually educated African Americans that completely ignores the slavery whole thing, but the Greeks that we love, science and philosophy all day, every day. And then Christianity and the Dark Ages and everything like that covered it under, and there was systems of oppression, things like that. Then the Renaissance. And from the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. And these great thinkers, again, who we quote on our websites and in our brochures. And now here we are carrying forward the torch of the Enlightenment. Isn't Europe great? Yeah. When you try to get other people involved in this and you say, be more like us, this is who we are, this is our history, that can be a hard sell in some communities. I went to Temple University. It's a very diverse school, the first African American studies program, one of the largest. There's the professor there who coined the term Afrocentrism. And I had a really hard time with my black friends talking about humanism and free thought and getting them to consider it as a viable philosophy because of its Eurocentrism. There are other ways to talk about humanism, and this actually touches upon some of the other things I wanted to mention. The kinds of issues that we're involved in. There are other kinds of issues that humanism should be concerned about that relatively wealthy, well-educated men who come to our meetings don't tend to be concerned about, like social justice issues. If you look at the activities that a black church, for example, gets involved with, it's how do we help people, really help people, not just how do we help people by talking about how great evolution is or something like that, or how many reasons we have that God doesn't exist. It's, gee, there's a soup kitchen we can go volunteer for. You know, there's an education program we can spend some time doing. There's tutoring initiatives in the city that we can do. The most I usually see humanist groups get involved in is an Adopt the Highway cleanup project, which is not unimportant, but it's disconnected from the ideals we have of really serving humans, of helping people. Also, in the story of humanism, we lack certain kinds of cultural awareness. Don't check your watch.
I'm not checking it for you. Not checking it for you. No,
all right.
go on, seriously.
Minute and a half, I swear. Because of lack of diversity, we lack certain kinds of cultural awareness. When I started working for CFI, I came in as a kind of secular atheist activist. I was interested in church-state separation issues. I was interested in rights of non-believers. I wasn't on board with the whole yay science thing. And yay medicine thing. Oftentimes when we sell science in an organization like CFI and in other affiliated organizations, we say, how can anyone hate science? Science has brought us all these great things. How can anyone hate medicine? It's extended our lives and treated our people. Without knowing that there's some baggage sometimes that people have about science and medicine. To me, as a kind of environmental lover type, science was what caused pollution. Science was what caused a population that we can't keep up. Science was what caused atom bombs and things. And I learned over time that there were negative associations with medicine that I didn't have because both my parents are nurses, but in the African American community is where I was, I'll tell this from personal experience, poor African Americans distrusted doctors because of long-standing cultural memory from things like the Tuskegee experiments, because the government testing things on African Americans. Who doesn't know about those? No one? You all know? I'll talk to you about it later, so I won't use time. But the government allowed, I think, hundreds of African American men to have syphilis. They were enrolled in this study, and even after penicillin was discovered to treat syphilis, the study went on for another 30 years. They infected their wives. They had kids born with congenital syphilis who died, and it finally was exposed in something like 1972. Because of that, it shouldn't be too weird that there are African Americans who say the government started AIDS or caused AIDS. Now, when I first heard that, I was shocked, like, you're a moron. No, of course they didn't. But then I thought, well, the government has done some pretty stupid things, and more things are coming out about syphilis experiments and prisoners in Guatemala and things that make me think it's not too unreasonable, if you have the idea that the government is testing these things on your population, to think that they might have created AIDS, things like that. So, cultural baggage that comes with terms we don't even see if we don't have people of color involved in our movement. So, what do? For local groups, consider where your meetings are being held. That's easy. Not a lot of groups are willing to change that. In Philadelphia, for example, a lot of groups meet in the suburbs, not in the city, and people who would need to take public transportation to get to meetings can't get to them comfortably. The people in the suburbs don't want to go into the city. Most of the city is African American, most of the people in the burbs are white. What else can we do? I'm actually skipping the why we should care part, but time, silly time. Care! On an organizational level, what I'm trying to do with African Americans for Humanism, and I'll go through this quickly, I hope we can see changes on these things, is create a speakers bureau, a well-fledged one-piece speakers bureau. Greta Christina has been fantastic at putting together a list of atheists of color. I'm going to expand on some of those. I have some other people to add. We also want to sponsor a speakers tour of historically black colleges and universities. That seems to be an obvious outreach kind of thing to do. I hope to get Anthony Pinn on some of these campuses, and Sakivu Hutchinson, who's another amazing speaker. We hope to build and support community online as a starting point for getting more African Americans and Latinos involved, and to create meetup groups in major cities. We've pegged out Philadelphia and Chicago as the next two. We already have them going in DC, Houston, Los Angeles, Atlanta. I'm missing one somewhere. Students and local groups, what you can do include branching out with your meeting topics, not just talking about God and evolution. Humanism and free thought and atheism and secularism are foundational to a lot of different kinds of ways of thinking. We can talk about environmental issues, network, invite the Greens, talk about politics, be careful there. Talk about race, is it biological? If you're on campus, invite some speakers from the anthropology departments, from biology departments. Is race biological? Can we say distinctly there are these categories? That's an interesting question. You might get some new people showing up at your meeting. Talk about feminism and gender equality. Talk about social justice issues. Talk about prison system. How many of you know someone in prison? If you were an African American audience, I bet almost all of you would have your hand up. Talk about rehabilitation versus punishment. And, well, I won't go more in there. Talk about public education, which to me is big. Philadelphia's public education system is absolutely terrible. I think that's the case in a lot of cities. If you're organizing in or around a city, try to do, you can start by talking about it. Consumer awareness programs, skepticism, get science nerds involved. Talk about what atheism means and how it can be different in different cultures. For example, in the Pacific Northwest, there are many Asians who might consider themselves atheists, but not the kinds of atheists that we are. I know at universities there are lots of Asians, because I'm being racist right now. Get the Asian, what's the equivalent? Asian Pacific Student Association, or whatever it's called at your campus, to come and talk about religion in Asia, or atheism in Asia, or Buddhism and atheism. Is Buddhism a religion, or the Buddhisms, actually, because there's so many of them. Another way that you can try to reach out and have more people of color come to your meetings is to have more service projects. They also tend to get a lot of women, and not just adopt a highway type things. Volunteer with other organizations on campus, including some of the ones we talked about. Do social service projects, do soup kitchen volunteering, network with churches to do service projects. Especially in certain cities, that's going to automatically mean you're working with people of color that you hadn't even been talking to before and didn't know that non-believers existed in your city. And last recommendation, I think, one of the last ones, is to create focus groups or consider creating focus groups. Like women's meetup groups. If you're a local group, you might want to consider getting your few people of color members to create small group meetings, pay the $72 every 6 months and start a meetup group, see if you can find others. That worked for us in DC. Address privilege in your group. Bring in a speaker to do some exercises. Run a workshop. What the hell is privilege? What's it mean when you don't recognize you have this thing? Don't assume that your experience is universalizable. Freaking listen. Jen talked about that a lot. That's big. And be willing to talk to others and teach others about it. And admit when you don't know something, or that you don't even know that you might not know something. We're not very comfortable with that, it seems. But I think that that should be part of our critical thinking and skepticism and whatnot. I'm so out of time. But thank you. I hope we can talk more in Q&A.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Fantastic.
Damn it, I'm so sorry.
No, don't be sorry. You'll be fine. We have a break before dinner, so, you know, we can let the session go along, too.
I apologize sincerely for going over my 10 minutes.
Anyway, you'll be able to hear more from Debbie in just a moment. Before we go to that, though, our last speaker of the session is Greta Christina, who blogs at the very cleverly named Greta Christina's blog, and which is one of the most popular atheist, agnostic, humanist blogs. And she also writes for Alternet, where she gets oodles of hits when she writes about atheism. And I understand, Greta has told me this many times, that the intellectual quality of the comments on her posts is always outstanding every time. So you should just go read the quality on the comments. Blog comments are great stuff. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Greta Christina. So I'm going to set that for 10 minutes, but don't panic.
All right. Let's see, where will this go?
Apparently that's really fun to put on.
Okay. Oh boy, it sure is. You weren't kidding. There, I think that works. All right. So thank you, Jen, and thank you, Debbie. And hi, I'm Greta Christina of the fabulously named Greta Christina's blog. And so Debbie and Jen have been talking about gender and race and how that applies to diversity in the atheist movement. And I'm going to talk about diversity in the atheist movement and how it applies to the LGBT community. And in a lot of ways, I have the much easier job. They had a much harder job than I did. Because for the most part, the atheist movement has been very good about being welcoming of LGBT people. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We get stuff wrong. You know, there's sometimes an assumption of heterosexuality. We're definitely not as good with the T part of LGBT as we are with the LGB parts of it. And of course, there are still a few homophobic jackasses in the movement, as you'll see if you read Feringula and read the comments. But for the most part, LGBT inclusivity is something that we're really getting right. And so what I want to talk about today is what exactly atheists have been getting right about inclusivity of LGBT people, and I want to talk about how we can apply those principles to race and to gender, and also to other areas where we need to pay attention to diversity, like economic class and education levels and age and so on. And then I'm going to sum up by talking a little bit about why diversity matters and why we have to put conscious effort into it. And Debbie and Jen have talked about that some, and I'm also going to talk about it because it's really, really important. Okay, so the first thing that I think we're doing right about LGBT inclusivity is that atheists have been fierce and outspoken about LGBT rights. Our writers and our bloggers and our leaders talk about LGBT issues and same-sex marriage and how religion contributes to anti-gay bigotry, and they do it a lot. To give just one example out of many that I could give, the atheist blogosphere needed absolutely no prodding to blog about Prop 8. Everybody remembers Prop 8, the anti-same-sex marriage initiative in California. The atheist blogosphere was all over this issue, and they were all over it from very early on. And I know straight male atheist bloggers who are blogging about Prop 8 before I was. And I'm queer. I am in a same-sex marriage. And, you know, Faringula and Ed Brayton at Dispatches from the Culture Wars and Hammond at Friendly Atheist, these people were blogging about Prop 8 before I was on the train. So, and this makes LGBT people feel very much at home in the atheist movement, and it makes us feel like our issues are seen as the movement's issues. So, how can we apply this principle to gender and race? Well, we can talk more about sexism and racism. You know, we can talk about religious restrictions on birth control and how religious leaders encourage women to stay in abusive marriages, and you know how religion teaches women and girls to be ashamed of their bodies and their sexuality. And we can talk about how religion has traditionally defended racism and indeed slavery. We can talk about how churches exploit communities of color. And one example of that is, you know, the policy that everybody knows about, the policy that the Catholic Church has about moving child molesting priests from parish to parish to try to hide them. What you may not be aware of is that one of the Catholic Church's policies was specifically to dump child molesting priests into isolated communities populated by impoverished and disempowered people of color. I know, they're such gems. I love these guys. You know, we can raise the roof about these issues. We can make these issues as big a deal for our movement as we do things like same-sex marriage. And we can do that even if we are white or male. And in fact, we can do that especially if we are white or male. So this is the second principle I want to talk about today. And again, this is something that for the most part we really get right when it comes to LGBT inclusivity, and we can really apply this principle to other forms of inclusivity. When my wife Ingrid and I started hanging around in the atheist blogosphere, this is one of the first things that we noticed. On the rare occasions when somebody in a comment thread on Faringula or someplace would say something bigoted or stupid about gay people, straight people would immediately be all over them. We didn't have to be the ones speaking out about homophobia all the time. In fact, most of the time, we didn't have to be the ones speaking out about homophobia. We could sit back and watch the straight people deliver the smackdown. And just, you know, and that just by itself made us feel incredibly welcomed into the atheist movement and made us want to be more active in it. There's something that Ingrid often says about the atheist movement, which is she's been very involved in politics for much of her adult life, most of her adult life, way more than I have actually. She's a badass. And what she says is that the atheist movement is really the first time in any social change movement that she felt like straight men had her back as a queer woman. And that just really made her want to be a part of the atheist movement. And me too. So we do that really well with LGBT issues. We need to expand that into race and gender. White people need to speak out about racism, and men need to speak out about sexism. We need to speak out about it on larger social issues when we're just commenting on politics and issues of the day, and we need to do it when we see it in our movement. I know that it's hard. I know that it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me too. I mean, I don't want to be starting the next goddamn firestorm that eats the internet for a week. But if you know, it's uncomfortable, and there's also that thing where I feel like, oh, I shouldn't. If I say something about race, I'm going to make an ass of myself. I'm going to screw it up. I should just let the people of color talk about it because they know what they're talking about. But it really does not work that way. If women and people of color never see men and white people speak up about sexism and racism, then we are not going to feel like this community is home. When white people speak out about racism, and when men speak out about sexism, that makes people of color and women feel like, okay, this is our movement. It's not just their movement that they're graciously letting us into. I saw an example of this. This is actually a positive example of something that we got right. This is Greta gets to be the cheerleader. Sorry, guys. So I saw a positive example of this recently that I want to talk about because it was very encouraging. Recently on my own blog, I posted a list of prominent atheists of color. And P.Z. Myers at Faringula posted a link to it, and there was a predictable kerfuffle about it. I'm sure you could all write the script in your heads. What was new about this kerfuffle this time, what was actually not predictable about it, was that this time there were really only a handful of people, like maybe 2 or 3 people, who were making the argument that we shouldn't make lists like that and paying attention to race is itself racist. And there were a lot of people, including a lot of white people, smacking them down and explaining exactly why we need to pay conscious attention to racial diversity. I mean, the conversation was surprisingly nuanced, and it was a really satisfying smackdown. It was a big dog pile. And I don't think we would have seen that dog pile a couple of years ago. I mean, a couple of years ago when these issues got raised in the atheist blog sphere, it tended to be more half and half. It's like there's some people who are speaking up for diversity and some people who are speaking about how we should just ignore race, ignoring, as Debbie points out, that ignoring race is a privilege that white people can have, and black people don't have that privilege, and other people of color don't have that privilege. So I think a couple of years ago, it would have been much more, it wouldn't have been a dog pile, and this was a dog pile, and that was really satisfying. And I think that these ideas about diversity are beginning to get across. We obviously have a huge way to go, but I think that these ideas are starting to get across. One example is I'm beginning to see more diversity both in gender and race among speakers at conferences. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and it's better at some conferences than it is at others, but it's noticeably better than it was a couple of years ago, where a couple of years ago you would go to an atheist conference and pretty much every speaker on the roster would be a white guy. There might be one person of color and maybe one woman. And we're starting to see that a little bit more balanced, and I think the reason for that is that a bunch of us have been raising a fit about it. And so we need to keep raising that fit. We need to keep talking about it. Those of us who are already on board need to keep it on everybody's radar. Basically, we need to make it more of a pain in the ass to ignore this issue. We need to make it more of a pain in the ass to ignore this issue than it is to just deal with it already. Okay, so why should we care? Why should it matter so much that the atheist movement is largely white and male and has so many white men in positions of leadership and visibility? Don't we have other issues to worry about? Okay, I could talk about this question, the why should we care question, for a very long time. I actually give an entire 1-hour talk on pretty much this question, and I believe that Debbie and Jen both give much longer talks on this very question, and you should have us come out to your group and talk about this question at greater length. But my time is limited, and so I want to focus on one particular point, and this is a point that I really want to focus it because it's a point that's very hard to get across, and that is that racism and sexism and other isms are not always conscious. You do not need to be a torch-wielding member of the KKK or of Operation Rescue in order to say and think and do dumb things about race and sex. And believe me, as somebody who has said and done plenty of dumb things in her time, I speak from experience. A lot of racism and sexism is not grossly overt. It's subtle, and it's woven so deeply into the fabric of our culture that we're often not aware of it. And so because this stuff is often unconscious, that means we have to put conscious effort into overcoming it. We are not going to overcome unconscious biases by pretending that they don't exist. I want to give a couple of examples of how this kind of unconscious bias can work. Again, I could talk about this for hours, but we have limited time, so just a couple of examples. First of all, even with the very best of conscious intentions, people tend to be more comfortable and more trusting with people who are more like them. And we're like, this is the reason behind affirmative action. People are just more likely, it's not that they're deliberately necessarily trying to be racist or sexist, although sometimes they are. It's just that they're just naturally, unconsciously feel more comfortable with people who are more like them, and they're more likely to hire them, and they're more likely to promote them. And in movements, how that works is they're more likely to bring them on as speakers, and they're more likely to encourage them to move into positions of leadership and local groups and so on. It's been well and thoroughly documented. This is not controversial, at least it shouldn't be. So if a movement starts out being mostly made up of and led by white men, and there's no conscious attempt to seek out and welcome women and people of color, that movement will have a very strong tendency to continue being dominated by white men. Remember Jen's little vicious circle graphic. And plus, people have a natural unconscious tendency to focus on the issues that concern them most directly. And if a movement, however unintentionally, is already dominated by white men, that movement will tend to focus its energies on issues that concern white men at the expense of issues that concern people of color. I mean, Debbie talked about that a lot. She talked about, it's like, if all you ever have at your meetings is conversations about, science and evolution, that's very much limiting your focus to issues that concern the people who are already in the movement, and is not welcoming. As another example, and Debbie gave about 1 million examples of this, but I want to give one more that I think is really crucial. And that's the very strong tendency in the atheist movement to provide an internet community more than we provide in the flesh communities. It's very understandable. Internet communities are really easy to form. All you have to do is sit there on your butt on Saturday night and go type, type, type. I'm guilty of it myself. I'm very bad about showing up at my local meetings. But this is a tendency that ignores the powerful social bond that churches provide in the African American communities. And it's a tendency that ignores the isolation that many African American atheists feel when they leave those churches. And it's a tendency that fails to offer a replacement. Okay, so we have unconscious biases. We therefore have to make a conscious effort to pay attention to them and to overcome them. But again, why? Why should we care? Why should it matter so much that the atheist movement is largely white and male, that this is who's in our positions of leadership and visibility? Don't we have other issues to worry about? Why shouldn't we worry about, getting creationism out of the schools and so on? Okay, so I'm going to answer this question, as I so very often do, as anybody who reads my blog knows that I do, with my unique blend of pie-eyed sky fairy idealism and cold-blooded lizard Machiavellian practicality. Okay, so the idealistic reason why we should do this is that it's the right thing to do. Because women atheists and atheists of color matter just as much as white male atheists. Because religion hurts women and people of color just as much as it does white men, more so in many ways. Because women and people of color who are potential non-believers are just as important as white men who are potential non-believers. And it's just as crucial to give them a safe place to land as it is to white men who are leaving religion. Because this conversation should not be about us and them. This conversation should be about us. All of us, all atheists and agnostics and humanists and brights and skeptics and free thinkers and nuns. This should be about all of us. Yeah, kumbaya. Okay, so the cold-blooded, pragmatic Machiavellian reason why we should do this is that this will make our movement stronger. Numbers will make our movement stronger, and making the movement more inclusive will bring more numbers. We bring more women, more people of color. That's just more people. It's more bodies in the movement. Thinking through our ideas will make us stronger, and making the movement more inclusive will challenge us all to think more clearly. And diversity itself makes us stronger. It brings new ideas to the table. It multiplies our abilities to make alliances with other social change movements. It brings a broader range of viewpoints to the public debate, and it also makes us not look like elitist jackasses in the public eye. And if you're still wondering why this is important, talk to anybody who's involved in any other social change movement. I'm most familiar with the LGBT movement, but really any social change movement, the labor movement, environmentalism, feminism, civil rights, you talk to anybody who's been around the block with these movements for like a few decades, every single movement that I know of has been bitten on the ass by this issue. And every single one now desperately wishes that they had taken action on it back in the early days. Back before these bad habits and the vicious circles and the self-fulfilling prophecies got set into a really deep groove that's really hard to break out of. And atheists have a really unique opportunity to not do that. Our movement, at least the current incarnation of the movement, the visible and vocal and activist incarnation of the movement, is still, relatively speaking, new. And we have a really unique opportunity to handle this problem early. So we're not wasting our time and energy trying to fix later, 10 or 20 or 50 years from now, what we could be fixing now. So let's take that opportunity and let's take action on this now. Thank you. And I also went over time. Sorry, it happens.
All right, we got plenty of time for questions. Do you want me to call on people, or do you want to call on people?
I think we should call people, actually.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you sit down.
I'm happy to sit down.
So one other thing that you can do about diversity is when there's Q&A, call the women and people of color first. There's only white guys raising their hands, that's fine, I'll call on them, but we can take turns calling on people. But really, that's something, one of the things that I notice is when you have a talk and you have the method of having a Q&A where people come to line up, that's a little bit of a problem because men are socialized to be more, white men especially, are socialized to be more forward and more assertive. And I don't know how many conferences I've been to where you've got a whole bunch of white men at the front of that line and a whole bunch of women. I've often wanted them to form that line and then move the microphone back. Yes, please.
I just wanted to address the about atheist attitude towards I'm old enough to remember
Pass that around.
homophobia in the atheist community, not in the humanist community, but in the atheist, and I have actually fairly recently been subject to homophobic attacks. So I don't think we're completely out of the woods on that.
So the comment was that that there is still homophobia in the atheist movement, and there historically has been, and I certainly wouldn't argue that. I mean, I don't think that we're perfect about it, but I just think that my experience, at least as a queer person in this movement, has been mostly positive. There are still issues. There's still homophobic attitudes. There's still a sort of an assumption of heterosexuality that I see a lot. We can be fairly transphobic, I think, a lot of the time. So I'm not trying to say by any stretch of the imagination that we're perfect on this. It's just, but we're a lot better about LGBT stuff than we are about gender and race. And it's not like we're perfect, but we're pretty good about it. And therefore, I think that we can apply the ways that we're good about LGBT inclusivity to ways that to how we can be inclusive of women and people of color. Do you guys have any comments? Okay. So one of you call on somebody.
In the back? Yeah.
One other thing I would add to Greta Christina, why should we care, especially when it comes to women, and particularly young women, is that they are the ones that are so involved in raising children and next generation, and continuing on those whatever religious traditions they were raised with. So I think it's becoming more and more widespread, like Greg Mortensen's 3 Cups of Tea. How do you change a system? You educate the women. So I think bringing women into the movement is, if we want to look at the long term, it's critical.
And especially because I know that there are a lot of women who, when they do have children, when they feel like they have to go back to religion because they feel like that's how you raise kids. You have to be religious, and focusing not just on getting them involved early, but also keeping that involvement there to have groups that include children, or stuff like parenting beyond belief, and just having the education out there is really important. So putting more focus on that.
I actually sort of have a comment that's related. If I can just comment and take your question time away, since I'm good at that. Which is that one reason I wrote for why we should care about racial diversity in our movement is because it's going to become more and more important. And if we keep having big conferences, like the Amazing Meeting's coming up, and they did an amazing job getting more than half of the speakers to be women, including these two and not me. And of the I spoke last year. No, it's cool.
Facebook campaign.
But of the 49 I counted, 49 speakers on that list, 2 are identifiably people of color. 2! That's it. 2. And I couldn't even think of more than like 2 others who they might want to add who are really self-identified skeptics, which was a crying shame. But I'm a big census demographics geek, and we're going to see that there are more and more young people who are not white. Our leadership is going to have to change, and I think the sooner we make efforts to really change, the more and the better effort we put into changing our local groups and our student groups. Our student movement is still mostly overwhelmingly white. It'll be good for us as a movement. We'll have more and more people involved. We won't be the sort of elitist science philosophy movement that we sometimes are now. So, next question. You with the blue.
firstly, thank you for all your presentations. I learned a lot of things and got a lot of new ideas about what to do, so that was fantastic. I have a question actually about religious diversity. And I think that's going to become more of an issue within our own community as we expand. We'll come in with slightly different ideas of their own spirituality or religiosity. We're certainly seeing that at Harvard. They'll have to deal with that. But also how we deal with people who are not members of our community. Because I think there's an awful lot of, frankly, bigotry and even sometimes hatred towards people who are religious in our community. And I don't think that serves our own attempts to deal with other forms of bigotry, to have that as an accepted part of being in the atheist movement. And I'd like to know what you think about that.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah. So I have a couple of comments on that. One is, I mean, I think that it's true that that we need to be careful, even if we're being really passionate and vehement about critiquing religion, that we critique ideas and beliefs and that we not be insulting towards people. I think it's important that we understand the religions that we critique, rather than just sort of assuming that, Catholics eat babies or whatever. And something that I think that was pointed out one of the times that I gave a diversity talk that was pointed out was that we need to pay attention to diversity of what religious background the atheists are coming from. That we have a tendency, I think, in the United States to talk about Christianity, which is, understandable, obviously, because Christianity is a dominant religion here. But people who are leaving religion from Islam, people who are leaving religion from Buddhism, people who are leaving religion from Hinduism, they're going to have different issues, and they're not going to want to hear the talk, the 10 reasons why Jesus wasn't God, because they're down already. But I also think that it's an important point that we need to model not being bigoted in other areas if we want to be seen as not bigoted about race and gender. And I do think, now the flip side of that is sometimes we're going to be seen as bigoted anytime we say anything critical about religion. We're going to be seen as being bigoted if we say I'm an atheist. We need to just acknowledge that there's a limit to how far we can go with that. And anybody who knows me knows I don't toe the accommodationist line. But yes, I do think that we need to draw a very careful distinction between criticizing ideas and being insulting towards people, and it's a line that people aren't always good at drawing.
I was gonna try not to comment on this one. Darn it. I read some of this guy's book and saw some of his very interesting presentation, which might be relevant to what you're talking about. I'm really good at undermining what my comment is and whether it relates to your question, it seems. I'm on a roll right now. This guy, Neil Howe, came to the Center for Inquiry in Amherst, where I work, and talked about sort of cultural differences, idea differences between generations. He's really big on cycles of history stuff and said there are sort of 4 generation cycles, and we can go back 2,000 years and sort of trace this paradigm. And I came in towards the end and caught something that I thought was really, really interesting. He said, Gen Xers are very comfortable with the language of war. We're engaged in a cultural battle, calling people foot soldiers for some cause, saying we have to fight the good fight and all of this sort of thing. He said that millennials, and he drew the line right at my year, so I felt kind of old, but millennials are not comfortable with the language of war. They're not as comfortable with the black and white paradigm. And he said this came out of sort of the years of Bush and the internet, but he talked a lot about how people who grew up in this the years of Bush, where Bush said, we're engaged in this battle, you're either with us or against us, axis of evil, blah, blah, blah. They were very turned off by that, and they're much more interested in accommodation kinds of things. How can we work together? And in some areas, he said that's very, very important, like environmental issues. I think we should put religious differences aside and just be like, hell, we need to work on this. I agree with Theo Wilson there. It sort of surprised me because my first involvement in this was all kind of, we're engaged in this culture war. We have to fight this, that, and the other. I'm comfortable with that language. I've seen that the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds we work with on college campuses, especially the women leaders, don't seem to be comfortable with that. They want to be happy atheists. They want to have dances with Christian groups more often. A lot of this also depends on where it is they're organizing, so if it happens to be somewhere like Missouri, they're probably going to be more confrontational. But I think some of that has to do with age, I think some of our angriest student group leaders are actually in their late 20s to mid-30s. Ed Clint, I'd say, is a good example. He's 33 or so, and I'm 30 and turning 31 next week. Happy birthday to me. And I'm not that angry, but I'm also not an accommodationist type. I think we do have to consider, though, if we want to sort of foster more women in leadership roles, maybe we do need to be more nicey-nicey. And if we want to, some of the ways that we want to do college outreach now, we might be better served staying away from this language of war and being engaged in cultural battle.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that I do tend to be more of a firebrand, and my group, is in Indiana, so it was one of those really outspoken kind of race shit kind of groups. But again, I'm already in the movement, so I have the personality that is fitting for that. So the women who, are turned away by that wouldn't be as involved. This is tangentially related, but I just want to make a point that age is an important thing too. On more than one occasion, I've had people tell me that the only reason people are paying attention to me is because I'm a pretty young girl, and once I get old, that no one will listen to me anymore, and tangentially that also I have no idea what I'm talking about because I just haven't been around long enough and read as many books as them. And we can't disregard our young people like that. They're our future leaders in the movement, and we have to appreciate them too. And especially now that we're getting high schoolers involved, high schoolers especially, people are always like, well, you're just a little kid, you don't know anything about the real world yet. We need to really focus on not talking down to them. So, side point.
I just want to jump off of something Debbie said and off the original question, which is, I think that it's possible to both do alliance work with people we disagree with and disagree with them. And I think that a lot of what that has to do with is about timing and choosing our battles. It's like if we're going to work with, for instance, progressive or moderate religious believers on issues of, say, separation of church and state, or even issues of like environmentalism or social justice or reproductive rights, we can say, okay, for right now, we're going to set aside the question of whether what you believe is crazy bullshit. And we reserve the right to have that debate with you some other time. We're not going to. I really resent it when working with believers implies that I have to shut up all the time, that I can never argue with them. But I think that what we can do is say, okay, this is the time for the debate, and this is not the time to the debate because we're doing a service project.
Can I call on Tim Ridge?
Hi. So we have a new group in Mercer County, which is just north of Trenton, and we have found through experience working in our Jersey Humanist Network that we don't get much bang for the buck when we put out print advertisements or flyers on places, and we get a lot more bang for the buck when we advertise on the internet. So we're advertising on Meetup. We have a Facebook page. So we're getting people to come in that way, but we're still not getting people of color, and we're not getting many even LGBT members coming into our meetings, although we do have one trans that comes regularly. And she doesn't say much, but she comes. So my question is, how do you do outreach to people? And then, since we live just north of Trenton, we could do outreach in the city of Trenton, but I don't know really how we would go about that. It's a very poor city. Probably most of the black people, even black atheists that might be there, don't have an internet access except for a library. And there's only like one library in Trenton.
Closed all the libraries before.
So I'm just looking for answers of practical ways to do the outreach that we would like to do.
Just a quick suggestion. I know I found this with my own group, is think about where you're flyering. Because I know once I sent people out to flyer, and the next meeting it was like all guys who came to the meeting. I'm like, where are all these, like, why don't we have any women? And I asked them where they put the flyers, and they put them up all like only in the engineering building and not in the engineering building at Purdue. It's like all guys in engineering. And I was like, well, did you ever flyer at the psychology building? It's lots of women in the psychology department. They're like, oh, I don't want to go over by that building. I was too lazy. And so just thinking that, like, that's. Like, they were going to the buildings they were already going to, so they're just perpetuating the cycle. So just one tip is thinking about where you're physically flying. I don't know if you had any other suggestions.
I should totally answer this now, shouldn't I? He brought up a good point, which I'm going to distill into the idea that a lot of the failures of outreach of our local groups and even our student groups as to why we don't have more diversity in our groups is a class issue. We don't have many poor people in our group meetings unless they're literally college students right at that moment. And even then, they're not the poorest kind of college students because many times, sometimes they are, but many times they'll have 2 or 3 jobs while working and possibly even supporting a family. How do we get our message out to poorer people? Guys, no. It's not just like, how do we get more, like a city like Trenton, which I consider a dump, but I'm from Philly, so I'm biased. No, but it is sort of a dump. Like when you were saying flying, I was like, you don't want to fly here, Trenton, are you crazy? Do you know what's there? You don't even drive through parts of Trenton. Oh yeah, so it's parent. Yeah, but it's not just like, how do we get African Americans to our meeting, because our message is not, the message that we have right now, the services we provide, the social group meetings that we have, the educational lectures, are not appealing to people who make less than a certain amount of money, or people who, you know, might not have a high school diploma, who are working menial jobs. We're a funny kind of movement then, that we really don't have much to offer, it seems. What can we offer to them? More educational opportunities, help connecting with jobs. Why do people want to go to the kinds of lectures we have if they're struggling to put food on the table?
I think visibility at the soup kitchen, at the rescue kitchen.
So some of the social service projects that we could be engaged in as ways to get our message out. You know, at CFI and Amherst, and broader than that actually, lots of places, there are secular organizations for sobriety meetings. And that's a way that we get new people in the door, and we don't at all, especially for that kind of meeting, it's like secular AA. We don't at all push that people should be free thinkers or even consider our issues, but we have literature all over the place about stuff. And sometimes people end up coming to our potlucks, which is probably terrible because there's a lot of wine in there, but they end up coming and they say, oh, I got your brochure and I didn't even know that people thought this way or had meetings about this. Like, what do you do? What are these lectures you have? And that way they get plugged in. I know the CFI group in Chicago volunteers at a soup kitchen. They used to do it monthly, and they would get a lot of new people out of that, just having conversations with people. Most of the people they got from that were other volunteers and not the people they're feeding soup to, which is fine. So I guess finding new ways to do these sorts of projects in Trenton, seeing what's available, plugging into the already existing programs or doing other volunteer things is what I would suggest. But also, unless the movement changes and we have other ways of bringing in poorer people, I don't even think we should. We have things to offer them.
I want to add a couple of small things on that. I mean, one thing I think we really need to look at is, you know, what do the churches offer? You know, it's like a lot of times what they offer is actual on-the-ground help. You know, it's like they'll, you know, if somebody's like about to get evicted, they'll, you know, pass a collection plate, and instead of it going to the church, it'll go to, you know, help this person not get evicted. You know, that kind of thing. You know, it's so, you know, can we offer some on the ground help? Can we offer, you know, can we organize a daycare, you know, center? And something else, and I realize that we're still a pretty small movement. We may not be able to do that yet, but I think one thing we can do is partner with existing groups. You know, it's like if there's a group that's already existing that's doing good work and that could use some help, that could use some hands, and they're, you know, in their you know, their soup kitchen or in their daycare center or whatever. I think that if we, you know, while we're still kind of small and scrappy, we can partner with existing groups.
I think you're dying back there. Say something. Yeah.
Yes, I just copy this idea. I'm from Guatemala, Central America, and a girlfriend of mine came. She's in Seattle now, and her family and grandmother, and retired like I am now. But in the good days, she was helpless. I think that wasn't Seattle. She had to run away. She was working for a senator's wife, and they thought that she was illegal and said, hey, move out, because no one got to defend you, and she moved out. But now he's doing fine. But I remember she said, for example, that you are a witness, like we were raised Catholic. They were helping not just her, but everybody else with the faith part. But then, of course, your Jehovah's Witnesses were also helping themselves because the government helped to help the poor people. So therefore, but they were getting percentage of they filled a paper for them to get welfare, I guess, or something like that. And of course, the ministers, they were getting the percentage. She was educated enough, even we didn't speak with the language, we were smart enough in terms of the school was hired to figure that out. I was not in that. I live in Nevada. But she told me that story, how that's example. Example how these people, they were benefiting themselves, but that's on the side, but they were getting lots of people. They fill up their papers for the Hispanics that they started to fill them up to get to survive. Let's put it that way. So it's an idea.
You reminded me of a program that's run at CFI in Toronto. They do English as a second language classes. And again, the goal is not necessarily to make everyone into an atheist. It's to offer a social service. They have volunteers who run it and a trained educator. They bring them in, they show them that they're doing good stuff, and for a lot of the recent immigrant populations, they'd never known that there were atheists. And so the first step is showing them that we're here and we're being good people. And then some of them end up coming to other group meetings and things like that. But even that is moving them forward one bump and saying, hey, we're here and we're doing good things, and now you know we're happy atheists, is a good step.
Sure. I wanted to comment, something resonated with me that you were saying about the diverse religious backgrounds that people come from. And this is something that I've observed in New Jersey with the diverse population. Sometimes we have people who either come from India or from Middle Eastern countries who are secular, and they show up at our meetings or our dinners, and we hit them like vultures because we're so interested in their story, and the entire evening turns into them telling their story about how they grew up secular in Iran, and they don't come back. They tend not to come back. And I mean, maybe some people would like to go to an event where the entire event is all about you. But,
Right.
And maybe they don't. And with just a few exceptions, they don't come back because, and I've always felt like we hovered over that person all night long to hear their story about secular Hinduism, kind of, and so.
I hate to say that the same thing happened at my Purdue group, and so Purdue, it's in the middle of Indiana, it's super white, like it's not diverse at all, as much as they want to say that they are, and we finally had a black girl coming to the meetings, and it was just like, oh my god, we're not just all white people in a circle jerk anymore. And I think like
we meant well.
Yeah, it's like we meant well, but it's like when we're asking her like, what was it like, coming from an African American community, and then it was just like she came a couple times, but then it was just like, I don't want to be the token person here anymore. And I mean, I've had that too, where I'm the token woman. I don't want to be like the go-to person constantly on women's issues. So it's like, it's a hard balance. Yeah. I don't know if I have an answer.
It makes them a different, an other.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're going to hang out with us? Tell us about your thing. It's so different than all of ours.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is creepy. I've had that happen as a young person, as a person of color, as all sorts of things.
Yeah, and definitely, I mean, that's a case where the intentions are good. There's no conscious intention to be a jerk. In fact, the intentions are very much, we're trying to be inclusive. We're trying so hard to be inclusive that we're going to glom on to it.
And I guess that's where experienced group leadership, should sort of be like, hey, chill, sorry, we're not usually like this. We don't usually kill with kindness. We hope you come back, please.
Yeah.
Okay, one quick thing that can help besides going to a soup kitchen or flyering, just look at the community itself. Everybody has a parade, everybody has a march, everybody has something similar to that. Two quick things, and one of them is a plug for the LGBT Council, which I coordinate, which I love, and I hope all of you do as well. Number one, and I don't like to talk down about groups or people, but I was really disappointed with my group in San Diego and all of the groups in San Diego, because we talk a good talk about equality and justice, and months beforehand, I brought up being involved in the Martin Luther King parade, and nobody was interested in doing that. And I was really offended. And I even tried to say things like, well, regardless of the fact that King was Christian, the guy who organized the March on Washington, King's mentor, was a gay black humanist by the name of Bayard Rustin. If you guys don't know Bayard Rustin, look him up. Secondly, one type of celebration that's always a lot of fun is LGBT pride events, pride parades. If you haven't been involved in one, and even attended one, you should really do that. And one of the main projects for the next year and a half from the LGBT Humanist Council is called 51 Places, 51 Prides. At least one AHA affiliated or chapter group in an LGBT pride parade in at least every state by 2012. A lot of our chapters are already doing that. Student groups, hook up with your local chapters. You'll meet community leaders. It'll be great. But if you can't afford it, we're working out a way to fund local groups to be involved. So you have no excuse not to reach out to the general community, go to another community's event, and just show that you care. And that's a good way to do that.
Yeah, and especially for the student leaders in the room. I know one of the things our group did was we co-hosted Greta Christina talking to our group with the Gay Student Union. And, a lot of them either didn't know we existed, but when it was like, hey, we're willing to work together on this topic that we're both interested in, we had a lot of new people come to our meetings. That was one of our most diverse events that we ever had. So just finding those, the GLBT groups, the women's groups, any sort of cultural groups on campus, like that can be really helpful if you can find a joint event to sponsor. Sure.
And quick thing on race. Right now, Boston Museum of Science, their latest and greatest exhibit is about humans and race and how we're different and how we're the same. But the topics that really hasn't got touched on outside of the initial mention, kids. The Camp Quest, I think that's an amazing thing. We're actually going to try and do that, but timing may not work out so well. One of the things that our group is doing is we're trying to do a Skeptics in the Park. And we sort of tried to start that, and then Kansas sort of turns into a frozen wasteland. So we're waiting for it to not be a frozen wasteland so much on the weekend. And a lot of us in our group have kids. And they're somewhere between, we've got newborns all the way up to 12, 13, 14-year-olds. And the idea is we're going to go to the park and Mentos and Coke and all that the fun science that you don't want kids to do in your house, and try and take them out and do apple drops and gravity and just those kind of science isn't a lab coat boring thing. It's there's practical application. It's kind of fun. You can make a mess and it gives the kids a time to just go play and have fun.
We did that in St. Louis doing Skeptics in the Park, and it's one of our most well attended and most fun events here.
And it's an excuse to make a mess.
Yes, in the back.
I thought this program was great. Thank you so much for all your information. I'm going to take it home and deliver it to the board of directors of my group and all the our board of directors actually has a dynamic young female African American on their board. So, and I know for sure we have people because they self-identify themselves in our membership as being struggling financially. So we have a bit of diversity, but we also have these well-seasoned white, well-educated professional older guys, and I just want to come to their defense for a couple of reasons. One is that I stereotyped those individuals, and then I got to know one of them and found out that he was a trailblazer in the human rights area in the 1960s. Was taught was one of the few white guys taught at a black college in the South, and also because one of the most reviled minorities in history are atheists, and who were the trailblazers who pushed society to recognize atheists? And a lot of them were well-seasoned white men. And so I was very inspired by Rebecca Goldstein last night because she's a really intelligent, highly accomplished, very impressive young woman. I thought she was young. And yet she was paying tribute to Spinoza. She was paying tribute to the heritage and to the so-called forefather who impressed her so much that this young woman
Do any of you want to take it, or? Yeah, I mean, I think that, the point here isn't, that wealthy older white men are all jerks. That's absolutely not the point. And I don't think any of us said that. That's not the point. The point is that we could be a bigger movement and a richer movement if that's not the only people we have. And the point is that if that's all that the movement is, then there's really serious limits into how far we can grow, how empowered we can be, and so that's the issue. It's not the point of this isn't we're trying to diss and it's like we talk about it's like we have unconscious tendencies to be racist or sexist or other-ists, and I think we all understand that that's something we all do. It's like it's not like that's just that that as a dyke I'm therefore entirely free of any isms in my life whatsoever. I mean, of course that's not true, and we all have our own areas where we're privileged and our own areas where we're less privileged, and the point is that we need to pay attention to that. We need to really put conscious attention into not saying the older white men are jerks, but saying this could be a much, this would be a much bigger movement and a much richer movement.